If you look at beneficiation, there's broad support from business of the concept. But I guess the issue for all of us is how do you define beneficiation, for starters? Because even miners are saying when you mine an ore from the ground, well, let's face it, that's a type of beneficiation, isn't it? Fabricating a motor vehicle, well, that's a more extreme downstream version of beneficiation. How much beneficiation is already taking place? Who are the lead agents who drive beneficiation? Is it mining companies, or should it be the manufacturing sector specifically? How do we encourage it? How do we facilitate it? How do we coordinate the actions of all the different role players who have a role to play in making sure that beneficiation does take place? So I think these are some of the questions that I hope to try and answer this evening, and then obviously answer a whole lot of your questions, which I know you'll barrage me with at the end. So let's start off. How much beneficiation is really taking place? I think it's quite interesting that we estimate that another 300 billion rands worth of value and about 150,000 jobs we estimate are in industries that use mineral products mined in South Africa. So let's just use a couple of examples. Last year, 43 tons of platinum was sold into the domestic marketplace and converted into catalytic converters, with South Africa accounting for about 13% of global production. About 5,000 jobs, about 20 billion rands worth of value. That's quite a significant industry in its own right. 125 million tons of coal converted into over 200,000 gigawatts of electricity that fired South Africa's economy. Unfortunately, we just don't quite have enough at the moment. It'd be nice to have a little bit more of that. Look at the 45 million tons of coal, valued at about 11 billion if you just take an average price of the coal, converted into liquid fuels, plastics, polymers, waxes, fertilizers, chemical feedstocks, etc., valued at 165 billion rand. I guess a lot of people don't recognize and don't realize that most of our fertilizers, plastics, polymers, etc., are actually fabricated in South Africa, with more than 30,000 jobs just in that one company producing that value. And I can go on. Iron ore converted into steel, cement produced. 80% of our domestic steel requirements are produced in South Africa. The 20% that we do import is specialized steel that is fabricated in other countries. If we look at our cement, 98 and 99% of our cement is fabricated locally from locally mined minerals, and yet we take it all for granted. We don't add value in South Africa. Well, that's the accusation sometimes. I think the level of beneficiation that we estimate is actually severely understated, and we actually need to do a lot more work on unpacking the value that really is created downstream. So let's have a look. So that's a quick where we think beneficiation is at in terms of downstream beneficiation. But let's have a look at the Dmr Beneficiation Strategy. Government have adopted this beneficiation strategy. It's produced by our lead department, the Chamber's lead department. That's the Department of Mineral Resources. There's also the new Industrial Policy Action Plan that has a section on beneficiation at the same time. But given the cross-cutting nature of beneficiation, clearly an integrated approach is key, involving a number of different government departments, DTI, DMR, Treasury, et cetera, And so any strategy on beneficiation has to talk to the National Development Plan, the new growth path, IPAP 5, where we find these abbreviations from. I think if a foreigner came into these discussions, they would think that we were talking a different language. ILP 2010, et cetera. We just look at the DTI IPAP proposals. They talk to beneficiation. They propose investigating 5 value chains. That's already the work that the DMR has been doing. Modifications to the MPRDA to ensure local availability of supply of minerals, the investigation of issues around strategic minerals, critical feedstocks and domestic pricing conditions are some of the issues that they've talked about investigating, but clearly in line with what the DMR does as the lead department. The lead department is working on a beneficiation implementation plan, which links back to the beneficiation strategy. We can't talk about that because obviously it's not available yet, but we will be engaging government on that in due course. If we look at the DMR's beneficiation strategy, what are they looking at and how we see it? They're talking about a strategic, coordinated approach to facilitate beneficiation. I think no one's got a problem with that. The need to identify cross-cutting constraints to beneficiation and the development of appropriate solutions, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's electricity supply, whether it's technology, etc. Looking at the top 5 beneficiation chains, and then working on a consultative process to make sure that all stakeholders buy into the process. So I think we all support those broader framework ideas. But then let's just share some of our ideas on the beneficiation front around a sort of general principle level. I think one of the nicest definitions of beneficiation was a definition given in the Minerals Policy White Paper of 1998. And it talks about broadly describing the successive processes of adding value to raw materials from the extraction right through to the sale of a final finished product to consumers. And it covers a wide range of different activities. These include very capital intensive, large scale operations like smelting and refining, which is mostly more located at the mining level, as well as labor intensive activities right down at the end of the value chain, such as craft jewelry, automobile manufacturing, etc. So it's quite an interesting definition. If you put it into a flow chart, effectively you can define 4 different stages of the beneficiation chain. So at stage 1, the miners are mining the stuff. They're producing washed and sized points. By stage 2, they're converting those mined products into concentrates of bulk tonnages and intermediate products, such as metals and alloys. Stage 3 is when you're starting to see the conversion into semi-fabricated or intermediate products like steel, like refined products, and in some cases work shapes and forms like you have in steel, flat rolled, coiled, etc., etc. And then finally you've got the final action of manufacturing a final finished product, and there we're looking at work shapes and forms, and that might be engine blocks, it might be a final fabricated motor vehicle. But I think what's interesting is you can see where mining's activities are located, which are very much in stage 1 and 2, and you can see where the manufacturing sector gets more involved, which is much more in stage 3 and 4. There's a little bit of intermediate steps where mining does get involved in stage 3, for example, in refining in South Africa. All our platinum and all our gold is refined domestically, and the mining companies do play a role at that level. But then obviously once it gets beyond that into jewelry fabrication, etc., it's into a different skill set.